Hi there, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on. For folks who don't know, although I see your little name there on the Zoom, John-Henry Crawford is a wonderful cellist, and you've got your second album now that is coming out this month. It's called Corazon. Look at that. I have a hot little copy in my hands right now.
Oh,
And music of Latin America. I've been listening to this, and it's so different from your prior album, that we talked about before, the dialogue album where you did music of Shostakovich and Ligeti
yes.
and Johannes Brahms, and now you're doing something completely different. You want to tell us a little bit about this new album and what precipitated it for you?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. So this album was a result of a number of things, actually. First was just kind of a general interest in Latin American music, which I've had for a while. And I think part of this is probably because of the fact that all my older brothers lived in South America for a time, for whether it be months or even years. And so basically that sort of started, that's how my journey with this music started. But furthermore, a few years ago when I was in Mexico competing at the Prieto competition, Carlos Prieto in Morelia, I had the great fortune to win the prize. And part of that comes with that is actually being able to do an album. And we talked about different options and what might be interesting to do. And we thought doing an all Latin American music album would be quite interesting. And so this has actually been in process for a number of years, deciding the pieces, coming up with the theme, and settled on Corazon because all of the pieces are very romantic. They kind of pull at the heartstrings. And I personally have a big passion for all of this music. So yeah, I've really enjoyed working on it.
Yeah. There are 10 pieces on this disc, different composers from Argentina, from Cuba, Brazil, Mexico. How did you narrow this down? I mean, there are some composers on here I don't really know, some pieces on here I don't really know, but other pieces, are standard repertoire. I wonder, I mean, there must have been some pressure when it comes to recording this stuff, because you want to make, the playlist as reflective as possible of your experience and your music. So how did you select the pieces on this disc?
It's a great question. As you put it, there is a little bit of pressure. It's really easy to just say, okay, I want to work on one country and just only have music from, Argentina. And people have and do make entire records just with the music of Piazzolla. Mm-hmm. For me, because I'd had a little bit more of a variety of experiences playing in Latin America, when I was in the Curtis Institute, we actually did a South American tour. We went to Brazil, to Sao Paulo, and to Costa Rica, and to Mexico. And we played concerts and also taught. So for me, because of my own history with the region, and also with my brothers having lived in different parts of the region, I thought it'd be interesting to make kind of a musical tour. And so this album is kind of a musical journey throughout Latin America, starting in Cuba, in the Caribbean, with Leo Brouwer's Canción de Cuna, which is kind of a lullaby. And we bounce around a little bit to Brazil and then to Mexico and Argentina. But to me, all of the composers represented, Ponce, Piazzolla, Villalobos, especially, reflect a great kind of tradition of Latin American music making, especially the 20th century, all the way up to today with Leo Brouwer and Egberto Gismonte, who are still alive and still active as musicians. So to me, I liked the idea of not only taking us on a journey throughout Latin America, but also a little bit of a journey through time, starting Ponce being the oldest, all the way up to today.
Well, you mentioned Manuel Ponce, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about him. I mean, you've got some works by him on here, and the big discovery for me was the cello sonata, which I had not heard before. It's a lovely uh, fun piece to listen to and very interesting and virtuosic in its own way. But you've also got, one of his most popular songs, the Estrellita, here as well, in an arrangement by Jascha Heifetz, and your guitarist, JIJI. Am I pronouncing that correctly, JIJI? How do you say
Yes,
that?
JIJI. Exactly how it looks. JIJI.
One of those
Yes,
names that you pronounce it like it looks on the paper. That's good.
Yes,
In
exactly.
my business, you never know. So talk a little bit about Manuel Ponce, and then I want to ask you about your collaborators on the disc.
Sure. Well, Ponce was, extremely innovative in that he combined. He was, in my opinion, one of the first Latin American composers to do this. He fused a tradition of classical, kind of more European framework of writing. You have this sonata, which is a very structured sonata form, but also includes Mexican folklore, these kind of canciones. The title of these songs are actually popular Mexican songs, right? If the translation is. And with the sonata, what immediately struck me when I was first reading through it was how similar it is to the songs, and in that within the sonata you have a number of these potential estrellitas or Por ti mi corazón, which is the other song that he wrote on this disc. But he's such an expert at fusing this Mexican folklore, this kind of song style, with chromaticism, something that is not, necessarily coming from Mexico. And the further you get into the sonata, especially in the fourth movement, there are moments in the second movement as well, you really hear him pushing a little bit of the boundary, pushing a little bit of the envelope on the sonata in terms of exploration of different tonal worlds with chromaticism, and really striking chords at times that are surprising, but also fitting to this Mexican folklore that he includes. So, in my opinion, Ponce was a real pioneer, and similar to that of Kodai or Bartok, because he took a lot of this song style that was native to his country, incorporated into a form that was very exploratory. So
yeah. Well, you mentioned song style and the folk music aspect of many of the pieces on this disc. I mean, that's sort of like a running theme, the idea of traditional song as well. And I would correlate that with the cello. I mean, it's a no-brainer that the cello is such a song-like instrument. All the string instruments are. How important is that to you to think in terms of singing with your cello when you perform, and especially this kind of music?
To me, it's really my ultimate goal as a cellist. The instrument, and as part of my training, I was always something that was always at the forefront of being a cellist and a musician first, is that the cello is just a vessel. The cello is just a tool that we use to communicate with. And we shouldn't try to sound like a cellist. We should try to sound like almost like a singer at times. And so a lot of, what I did growing up and still as much as I can to this day is imitate the human voice, is try to imitate what I would do if I were to sing this music. And so I think that to sound like a singer is the ultimate goal for a cellist, and hopefully that shines through with these pieces. But
yeah.
The other thing that's nice about Ponce's writing is that it lies very well on the cello. There aren't too many things there, with a few exceptions, there aren't many things that are super uncomfortable or that don't make sense. Some composers write for the cello, and it's a large instrument, so larger leaps can sometimes get in the way of what you're trying to do musically. And Ponce does this. He actually is able to include these kind of larger leaps. One of the second theme of the sonata starts off with this leap of a fifth. Two big leaps, but he does it in such a natural way that it seems perfectly normal on the cello. So I enjoy playing the sonata as well as listening to it.
Yeah. And I enjoyed listening to you sing just then. That was good.
Oh, thank you. I'm not, that's not my first instrument, but thank you.
Well, we talked about this briefly last time, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your cello, because it's a remarkable instrument, and the
Yes.
story that goes with it is also remarkable. And people that don't know should know about this, because you can kind of hear it, once you know the background, the backstory of it all, you kind of get a sense of the sound, the history of the piece. Tell the story of your cello.
Absolutely. I don't know if the listeners can also see, but I have the cello here. I had it with me and wanted to show, but this was my grandfather's instrument. And my grandfather was, incidentally, his name was Robert Popper, which also happens to be the last name of a very well-known cellist, David Popper, who wrote a whole book of cello etudes, but more importantly, all sorts of show pieces for the cello, recital works, and is revered as being a fantastic instrumentalist, fantastic musician, and pioneer of cello virtuosity. But this instrument, which belonged to my grandfather, Robert Popper, actually came from Austria, and he, in 1938, saw the writing on the wall of what was happening in his home country, and with the Nazi takeover, was more and more fearful for his life and for his family's life. And so he made the difficult but life-saving decision to leave his home country, and was able to find a Nazi travel passport that he got on the black market to go through Germany, and then later reached Latvia and Lithuania, where he waited for about 3 months for a sponsor who could certify his immigration attempt. Because at the time, you had to have a sponsor to come to the States, and someone who could certify that attempt. And before he left, he actually had a boy who was an American, who he befriended and played chamber music with, who was biking through Europe at the time. He had him smuggle this instrument into Switzerland across the border, so that later it could be recovered. This and about 3 or 4 other instruments. I think there were three violins, three cellos, and this is one of the few that made it out. And actually, when it was crossing the border, there were Nazi border agents looking inside, saying, we need to open this up and see what's inside. They were wanting to take the top off the cello and look inside to see if there was any contraband. But the reason he had to do this was because the exit tax was anything on your person. You basically couldn't leave the country and take anything with you. And so he had to have this done in order to be able to recover the instruments later. But after finally having his immigration attempt certified, he was the only passenger on a cargo ship through the Baltic Sea and landed in Denmark, and then took a train back through France to Switzerland to get the instruments, and then finally was able to come to the States. But there's actually a full article I wrote on this instrument and on that story called "If My Cello Could Talk." You can Google, and it has some more details, but the idea being that if this cello could talk, I'm sure it'd have a lot to say and a lot of stories to tell. But I'm very lucky to have it, and I feel that a part of my grandfather lives on through it.
Now, was it bequeathed directly to you, or did it go through somebody else in the family? How did it come into your specific possession?
So it's been in our family for over 100 years, actually. He purchased the cello in 1918. And he then played on it himself. He was an amateur cellist and a professional anesthesiologist. And he, played on the cello for probably 40 or 50 years. And after he passed, there was a kind of a gap between when I was ready for it, when I was the right size. I was about 7 when he passed away. Mm. And it really didn't have much activity in those years. About 6 years later is when I started to play on it. So he didn't directly pass it on to me, give it to me hand in hand, but I think he would be happy to know that I'm playing it. And I fortunately was able to play for him a few times when I was younger, playing some things, really early on, kids songs.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, it's great. It's a great story, and I think it's important for people to know the provenance of your instrument before they, listen to you play it. It certainly enhances the experience. So tell us about your collaborators on this disc. You have the same pianist from your debut album, and then you have JIJI. I know I can say your name properly now, who's a guitarist. I'm not familiar with her, but I've heard the pianist before. I wonder if you can tell us about your two collaborators.
Absolutely. Well, Victor and I go way back. We played first together about 10 years ago. And Victor Santiago Asunción is his full name. And Victor is a remarkable pianist, remarkable musician. He was a longtime collaborator with Lynn Harrell, the great American cellist, who passed away not too long ago. And it's actually a little bit of a tribute, that this album, not only to my experiences playing in Latin America, but also a little bit a tribute to my friendship with Victor, because the first piece we ever played together was actually La Gran Tango, which is on this disc. And it's the second kind of largest of the works on this disc after the Ponce Sonata. So it's really special to be playing that with him again. It kind of come full circle. We start playing that piece and then we finally record it almost 10 years later. But that was kind of what started our musical friendship, and we both realized that we enjoyed playing together and continued to do more things. But Victor, as a collaborator, really allows one to take more musical risk and to take more musical liberty, and that's really important, especially in recordings, because in concerts sometimes you take a risk and you might fail and people might notice. But in recordings, that's really the time to explore, to try everything that you can, to try and get the absolute ideal version of the piece that you have in mind. And so Victor is really great in allowing you to take as much of that liberty as possible. And JIJI and I also have known each other for a little while. We went to school together at the Curtis Institute, and I've known her for about 10 years as well. So they're both friends and colleagues of mine that we go way back. And we, at that time in school at the Curtis Institute, we never had the chance to play together. But we were aware of each other's playing and always admired each other's playing. And JIJI is a fantastic arranger and composer as well. And I've heard many of her arrangements for guitar that are of other pieces originally, and this version of her Estrellita, which she adapted from Jascha Heifetz's arrangement, is just a perfect setting for guitar and cello. It's really special to play. So a couple of years back, we finally were able to do a concert together in Brooklyn, and realized immediately how easy it was to work together. And so being a Latin album, I thought there'd be nothing more fitting to have guitar and cello duets as well.
It would be hard to do a Latin themed album without a guitar.
It would.
Yeah, to have that in there somewhere. Last time we talked about your social media activities. I checked out your Instagram account again, and you've got like 50,000 some followers. I just want to thank you for the little Star Wars tribute that you did.
Oh, I'm glad you saw that.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. That was you playing with yourself. Now, I relate that to the album because I'm wondering, like when I listened to the last track, the Oblivion, it almost sounded like a cello choir. I mean, was there any overdubbing,
Yes.
or is that all you?
That is all me. Well, okay, so it's a little both. It's not all me at once. That would be quite difficult. So this arrangement of the Oblivion is for 14 cellos.
Okay.
And so what we did was we did layer by layer. I recorded each line, starting from the bottom up, and kind of built a structure from the very bass line all the way up to, the kind of string quartet ×3. and then to the solo line. But it's really interesting because one would think that, oh, if you play along with yourself, well, you're playing with you, and so it should be easy because you already know what you're going to do, right? But it's not always the case. You know, in recording this, you try to predict what it is that you've done or that what you're going to do, and you realize that what you just played 5 minutes ago it sounds a little bit like a different person, perhaps, than what you're doing right this second. So it was a learning experience, but I think I'm very happy with how it turned out. And another thing with the bass line, it's actually written for a double bass originally, and so we had to tune down the cello to a very lower than it probably should go, but it seems to work in this setting, and I'm glad you noticed that. And as far as the Star Wars goes, I did a similar thing just kind of on my own without a producer. But I've always been a big Star Wars fan, and having all the parts together on cello, I thought would be quite special. So thank you for listening.
I want to see the video of the Oblivion, right? 14 different versions of you.
Yes. Yes.
That'd be a good social media video. I get credit for that if you do it.
Okay. Thank you for the idea.
Yeah, I was reading a couple of different profiles of you, and one of them talked about some of your hobbies. And one of your hobbies was doing magic tricks. Do you still do magic tricks?
I do, actually. I don't practice them as frequently as I used to, but the interesting thing about magic tricks is once you get a couple up your sleeve, pun intended, you know, as long as you maintain them every couple of months, they stick with you. And so when I was probably 13 or 14, I was really into card tricks and coin tricks and making things disappear. And I was obsessed, and I'd practice in front of the mirror for hours sometimes. And I had sort of a magic mentor who was a family friend who would have me over, and we'd work on magic tricks, and he'd written books on magic. His name was Barry Richardson. And it's been something that I, just have enjoyed and will sometimes pull out of my hat if I'm in a social event. But I do love magic tricks, and I think there's a lot of sleight of hand involved with the cello and magic. So there's kind of that correlation, doing things with your hands that are somewhat magical, and so that's kind of always inspired me musically as well to try and create magic with music. So.
That's great.
I like to think there's some kind of pairing there.
A nice tie-in there. I appreciate that. Well, I won't ask you to do any magic tricks for us right now. Don't worry about that. But I did want to ask you, last time, I mean, there's been a pandemic that has affected so many people in so many horrible ways. And now folks are starting to perform again and get out in front of audiences. That's been going on for some time. I mean, how has the pandemic affected you over the past couple of years, and how is it now for you? I mean, are you doing some performing?
I am, yes. So you're absolutely right. It really affected a lot of things, and the main thing was just a pause on all performances for a good 6 months to a year to longer in some cases. Fortunately, after, I guess it was probably 6 or 7 months after, some things started moving again, and we had some more live performances, which was great. And then I guess it was this past January was when the Omicron wave came. And so unfortunately, I had a good number of things that were going on in January that had to be canceled. And so that was a little bit of a return of this kind of pause on things. But one of them ended up being virtual, which incidentally was my first virtual experience performing. And it was a performance with orchestra, actually, the Haydn D major with the Shreveport Symphony. Wow. And it was just going through that experience was quite something, because we have all these people on stage and we're playing this beautiful concerto. And I know that there are people listening on the live stream and on the virtual stream. And when you finish, it's normally you just expect kind of this applause and this, but you finish and the music just kind of goes into the ether and there's a little bit of a silence, and it's a totally different experience. It was something really different. I don't want to say it was any less gratifying than a live concert, because I absolutely felt this sense of accomplishment, this sense of having shared something with the people who I know are listening. So there's it just goes through a little bit more of a mental hoop that you process what's just occurred. So it's definitely been a strange experience for all musicians I know, but one of the things that I really tried to do more of during this break was more recordings, like with the first album from last year, and more online things, with the Instagram, with my 1,000-day project that wrapped up during the pandemic. That was something that really kept me going, having just a little bit of a daily upload to share with people, something daily to share and to show to audiences who are still interested in listening to what we have to play.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for your time, cellist John-Henry Crawford. The new album is called Corazon, music from various countries: Argentina, Brazil, I've got a list here, Cuba, and Mexico. A wonderful album with you and with your pianist, Victor Asunción, and guitarist JIJI as well. A lot of great stuff on this disc. Thank you so much, John-Henry, for telling us about it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening, and pleasure to speak with you.